William Bedford, born December 14, 1963. When you talk about the most unfortunate NBA drafts, you have to include 1986. In fact, I don't think there is one that had a worse outcome from its top players, all touted as future stars and even game-changing generational talents. The Len Bias story is up there as the single most tragic NBA draft story of all time, in my opinion. Bias was supposed to be what everyone knows Michael Jordan, Isaiah Thomas, Magic Johnson, or one of those guys to be now, that didn't even get the chance to suit up for a game after overdosing on cocaine less than 2 days after being drafted second overall. If there were any indication how that draft class would turn out for most its stars, then that was spot on. Today's feature was one of those picks that ultimately disappointed with his play on the floor or had off-court drug issues that led to a short career, or both. William Bedford was the 6th overall pick in the 86 draft, a 7-foot center that left after his junior year in college and expected to be the next great big man of his time. At least with Phoenix's only pick in the first round, that's what they hoped. He was selected before 5 All-Stars and 3 Hall of Famers, one of 3 7-footers in the top 10, the only underclassmen along with Chris Washburn, who too flamed out the league as a result of a cocaine problem. Bedford's career is filled with promises unfulfilled, being first injured, tearing his ACL early in his career, then underperforming with the Suns, and traded after just his rookie season to a garbage time role with the Detroit Pistons in their glory days as the Bad Boy Pistons, being on the team for their first championship, but spending the entire year in rehab, watching the team from a television in the facility win the championship in 1989. The next year, he'd actually be on the team when they won back-to-back in 1990, playing in 5 games for a total of 3.8 minutes. He played a few more seasons in Detroit, never taking the steps toward the player many expected him to be until the team traded him to the LA Clippers. Before then, according to Bedford, the front office and coaches had assured him that one day he'd get his chance to be the man in Detroit, only to trade him months later. The Clippers waived him before playing a game, then the Washington Bullets did the same, latching on with the San Antonio Spurs, who just before he played his old Piston team, waived him as well. He was out the league at just 29 years old, still wanting to live a lavish lifestyle, and became a drug dealer doing and selling weed and cocaine, eventually getting caught in Michigan transporting over 25 pounds of weed, along with a few more arrests for drug possession, finally given a 121-month prison sentence he didn't even realize he had gotten until he got back to his cell and added up the months. 10 years in the feds. He did 9 and change, now is living as a food truck driver and convicted felon. What happened? Let's talk about it. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth. Let's get it, man. Take a minute to like, subscribe, and comment on who I should do next. William Bedford was a 7-foot center from Memphis, Tennessee that enjoyed the fruits of the growth lottery early on. He was 6'9" by his freshman year in high school, all while he didn't even like basketball at first. Partially because his skills didn't match his size and because he didn't enjoy the attention he got for being so tall but so bad at hoops. He stuck with it and eventually learned to play the game and became one of the best centers in his class by his senior year. By then, he was 7 foot and signed to Memphis State to stay close to his friends and family. College was a whole different ballgame for Bedford. Being a quiet, shy person, he was overwhelmed with the large arenas and the amount of people just watching him play, which led him to start smoking weed before the games to cope with the anxiety, and it worked. He improved every season to by the end of his junior year, he was considered a top 10 draft prospect, which he became, drafted by the Phoenix Suns in '86. Stunt number 1 came in on the wrong foot. So many factors lined up in William Bedford's case that made him a bust in the NBA and flame out before expected, but initially I think the way he came in and the draft he was in hindered him before it began. Bedford said that high school and college were vastly different. In high school, he still had older men around him wanting to see him make it further than the hood that made sure the young guys stayed away from drugs and street life, but being at Memphis State was so much pressure to perform that he needed something to take the edge off. Smoking weed provided that, but as they say, it's the gateway drug, and for William Bedford, that's exactly what it ended up being. He says every game in college he was high, and going into the NBA, there were no plans of stopping. Before the draft, he says he, Len Bias, Chris Washburn, and Roy Tarpley all sat in the back of the NBA draft green room, talking about how easy it would now be for them to score drugs now that they would have some money, but that they didn't want that to become of their situation, and how they would lead the charge in cleaning up the league, one already riddled with cocaine and substance abuse. They, of course, were the exact opposite. Bias overdosed, Chris Washburn and Tarpley received lifetime bans for drug abuse, and William Bedford did rehab in the middle of the highlights of his career, flaming out early because of that and his play, then after retiring, went to prison for nearly 10 years. At the time, drug use in the NBA was a normal occurrence. As you can see, drugs affected the best of them, and most of the players at the time were dabbling or had experience with drugs, mainly weed and cocaine. Smoking and having success all throughout college gave Bedford the wrong introduction to his professional life, and he fumbled it because he could never quit. Stunt number 2, rehabbing his reputation. William Bedford wasn't able to do that. Instead, rehab ruined his reputation and essentially pushed him out the league after 6 years when he was supposed to be in his prime at 29 years old. After dealing with a drug scandal in Phoenix, then traded to Detroit, Bedford allegedly continued using weed and cocaine and was approached by the league before the 88-89 season to either join rehab or be investigated and tested for drugs, in which, if found guilty, would be given a lifetime ban. At the time, the NBA had had enough and weren't leaving it up to the players any longer to clean up the league. Things had gotten out of control, to say the least, and William Bedford was a big name that had to suffer the consequences. He decided on rehab and had to miss the entire 88-89 season, watching his team from rehab. The Pistons had lost in the finals to the Lakers his first year there, 87-88, but this time defeated the same team to win their first NBA championship in history. Bedford watched on a small TV in rehab. Excited about the future, he rejoined the team in a bench role 89-90 as the Pistons repeated as champions. He remembers winning and being at the parade, celebrated by all the fans so much that he couldn't move through the crowd. At that point, he could never envision the lows his life would later hit. 2 more disappointing seasons on the bench came with the team before they traded him to the Clippers, then the Bullets, then the Spurs, who all used him in limited spurts because his reputation preceded him, and they didn't want to pay him his contract and wasn't sure he was the guy they wanted representing their franchise. Jerry Tarkanian, head coach of the Spurs, known for taking in strays with baggage, gave him his best shot 92-93, but after 16 games waived him as well, and no team would take a chance on him thereafter. He was still young, but his skills hadn't improved to say the least, and he was a bad image for a team and league looking to clean up in the 90s. He'd never play in the league again. Stunt number 3, no chance getting back. For Bedford, being waived wasn't a huge concern initially. Of course, he was disappointed he was no longer in the NBA, but as a guy with some money in his pockets and now all the free time in the world, he embraced being young still and no NBA obligations to report to throughout the 90s after 93. He began smoking weed heavier and doing cocaine until a friend of his said to him, instead of using so much cocaine and weed, why don't you sell them and at least make some money? The guy had a plan and Bedford agreed. For the next 2 years, instead of focusing on getting back to the NBA, only 30 years old at that point, he sold drugs to continue living like he was still in the league, and it did well for him financially. Until it all came crashing down and he was caught crossing state lines in 2001 into Michigan with 25 pounds of marijuana. He believes the guy he was with set up the entire thing. Surprisingly, released on probation, he was arrested 2 more times for possession with intent to distribute, and given a 10-year sentence. 121 months in a federal prison where he ended up doing 90% of his time when he should have been fighting for his way back in the league. The drugs and lifestyle tricked him and took away his potential in the end. After being released in 2011, he began coaching and didn't like it. Now he owns a food truck with his wife where he's a chef, hoping to have a building one day and own his own restaurant. All in all, William Bedford was another casualty of an era the players thought they were but weren't ready for. Drugs were the norm in those days, period, not just the NBA. Most people did it as the new trend or fad, and it cost so many their potential. Bedford never developed into a good center, too high or focused on getting high and not getting better. 6th overall pick to 10 years in prison for drugs was his legacy, sad as it is. Salute, much respect, but for these reasons, his growth was stunted. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth, and I'm out.